for them, and when it was fetched the three of them drank in brooding, gloomy silence. The draught invigorated Marius. It cheered Tressen's drooping spirits, and it quenched the dowager's thirst. The seneschal turned to her again with his unanswered questions touching the end of that butchery above stairs. She told him what Fortunio had said, that Garnash was drowned as a consequence of his mad leap from the window. Into Tressen's mind there sprang the memory of the thing Garnash had promised should befall him in such a case. It drove the color from his cheeks and brought great lines of fearful care into sharp relief about his mouth and eyes. "Madam, we are ruined," he groaned. "Tres San," she answered him contemptuously. "You are chicken-hearted. Listen to me. Did he not say that he had left his man behind him when he came to Condillac? Where think you that he left his man?" "Maybe in Grenoble," answered the seneschal, staring. "Find out," she told him impressively, her eyes on his, and calm as though they had never looked upon such sights as that very night had offered them. "If not in Grenoble, certainly, at least, somewhere in this Dauphiny of which you are the king's lord seneschal. Turn the whole province inside out, man, but find the fellow. Yours is the power to do it. Do it, then, and you will have no consequences to fear. You have seen the man?" I have seen him. I remember him, and his name, I bethink me, is Rebecque." He took courage. His face looked less dejected. "You overlook nothing, madam," he murmured. "You are truly wonderful. I will start the search this very night. My men are almost all at Montelimar awaiting my commands. I'll dispatch a messenger with orders that they are to spread themselves throughout Dauphiny upon this quest." The door opened and Fortunio entered. He was still unwashed and terrible to look upon, all blood-bespattered. The sight of him drove a shudder through Tres San. The Marquise grew solicitous. "How is your wound, Fortunio?" was her first question. He made a gesture that dismissed the matter. "It is nothing. I am over full-blooded, and if I am scratched, I bleed, without perceiving it, enough to drain another man. Here, drink Mon Capitaine," she urged him, very friendly, filling him a cup with her own hands. "And you, Marius?" she asked. "Are you recovering strength?" "I am well," answered Marius sullenly. His defeat that evening had left him glum and morose. He felt that he had cut a sorry figure in the affair, and his vanity was wounded. "I deplore I had so little share in the fight," he muttered. "The lustiest fight ever I or any man beheld," swore Fortunio. "Dieu! But he was a fighter, that Monsieur de Garnache, and he deserved a better end than drowning." "You are quite sure that he is drowned?" Fortunio replied by giving his reasons for that conclusion, and they convinced both the Marquise and her son. Indeed, they had never deemed it possible that the Parisian could have survived that awful leap. The dowager looked at Marius, and from him to the captain. "Do you think, you too, that you will be fit for tomorrow's business?" "For myself," laughed Fortunio, "I am ready for it now." "And I shall be when I have rested," answered Marius grimly. "Then get you both to rest. You will be needing it," she bade them. "And I, too, madam," said the seneschal, bending over the hand she held out to him. "Good night to you all." He would have added a word to wish them luck in the morrow's venture, but for the life of him he dared not. He turned, made another of his bows, and rolled out of the room. 5 minutes later the drawbridge was being raised after his departure, and Fortunio was issuing orders to the men he had recalled from their futile search to go clear the guardroom and antechamber of the northern tower, and to bear the dead to the chapel, which must serve as a mortuary for time. That done, he went off to bed, and soon after the lights were extinguished in Condillac, and save for Arsenio, who was on guard, sorely perturbed by all that had befallen, and marveling at the rashness of his friend Batista, for he had no full particulars of the business. The place was wrapped in sleep. Had they been less sure that Garnash was drowned, maybe they had slumbered less tranquilly that night at Condillac. Fortunio had been shrewd in his conclusions, yet a trifle hasty. For whilst, as a matter of fact, he was correct in assuming that the Parisian had not crawled out of the moat, neither at the point he had searched nor elsewhere, yet was he utterly wrong to assume him at the bottom of it. Garnash had gone through that window prepared to leap into another, and, he hoped, a better world. He had spun round twice in the air and shot feet foremost through the chill waters of the moat, and down until his toes came in contact with a less yielding substance, yet yielding nevertheless. marveling that he should have retained until now his senses. He realized at times that he was touching mud, that he was really ankle-deep in it. A vigorous, frantic kick with both legs at once released him, and he felt himself slowly reascending to the surface. It has been often said that a drowning man in his struggles sees his whole life mirror before him. In the instance of Garnash's ascent through the half-stagnant waters of that moat, he had reviewed the entire situation and determined upon the course he should pursue. When he reached the surface, he must see to it that he broke it gently, for at the window above were sure to be watchers, looking to see how he had fared. Madame, he remembered, had sent trace send for muskets. If he had returned with them and they should perceive him from above, a bullet would be sent to dispose of him, and it were a pity to be shot now after having come through so much. His head broke the surface and emerged into the chill darkness of the night. He took a deep breath of cold but very welcome air, and moving his arms gently under water, he swam quietly, not to the edge of the moat but to the chateau wall, close under which he thought he would be secure from observation. He found by good fortune a crevice between two stones. He did not see it. His fingers found it for him as they groped along that granite surface. He clung there a moment and pondered the situation. He heard voices above, and looking up he saw the glare of light through the opening he had battered. And now he was surprised to feel new vigor running through him. He had hurled himself from that window with scarce the power to leap, bathed in perspiration, and deeming his strength utterly spent. The ice-cold waters of the moat had served, it would seem, to brace him, to wash away his fatigue, and to renew his energies. His mind was singularly clear and his senses rendered superacute, and he set himself to consider what he had best do. Swim to the edge of the moat, and, clambering out, take to his legs was naturally the first impulse. But, reflecting upon the open nature of the ground, he realized that that must mean his ruin. Presently they would come to see how he had fared, and failing to find him in the water, they would search the country round about. He set himself in their place. He tried to think as they would think, the better that he might realize how they would act, and then an idea came to him that might be worth heeding. In any case, the situation was still very desperate. On that score, he allowed himself no illusions that they would take his drowning for granted and never come to satisfy themselves. He was not optimist enough to assume. He abandoned his grip of the wall and began to swim gently toward the eastern angle. If they came out, they must lower the bridge. He would place himself so that in falling it should cover him and screen him from their sight. He rounded the angle of the building, and now the friendly cloud that had hung across the moon moved by, and a faint, silver radiance was upon the water under his eyes. But yonder, ahead of him, something black lay athwart the moat. At once he knew it for the bridge. It was down, and he had the explanation in that he remembered that the Lord Seneschal had not yet left Condillac. It mattered little to him one way or the other. The bridge was there, and he made the best of it. A few swift, silent strokes brought him to it. He hesitated a moment before venturing into the darkness underneath. Then, bethinking him that it was that or discovery he passed under, he made for the wall, and as he groped along he found a chain depending and reaching down into the water. He caught at it with both hands and hung by it to await events. And now, for the first time that night, his pulses really quickened. There in the dark he waited, and the moments that sped seemed very long to him, and they were very anxious. He had no good sword wherewith to defend himself where he attacked, no good, solid ground on which to take his stand. If he were discovered, he was helpless, at their mercy, to shoot or take or beat to death as best they listed. And so he waited, his pulses throbbing, his breath coming short and fast. The cold water that had invigorated him some minutes ago was numbing him now, and seemed to be freezing his courage as it froze the blood in his veins, the very marrow in his bones. Presently his ears caught a rush of feet, a sound of voices, and Fortunio's raised above the others. Heavy steps rang on the bridge over his head, and the thud of their fall was like thunder to the man beneath. A crimson splash of light fell on the moat on either side of him. The fellow on the bridge had halted. Then the steps went on. The light flared this way and that, and Garnash almost trembled, expecting at every moment that its rays would penetrate the spot where he was hanging and reveal him cowering there like a frightened water rat. But the man moved on, and his light flared no longer. Then others followed him. Garnash heard the sound of their search. So overwrought was he that there was a moment when he thought of swimming to the edge and making across the country to the north while they were hunting the meadows to the east. But he repressed the impulse and stayed on. An eternity did it seem before those men returned and marched once more over his head. A further eternity was it until the clatter of hoofs on the courtyard stones and their thunder on the planks above him brought him the news that Trayson was riding home. He heard the hoofs quicken and their loud rattle on the road that led down to the Iser, a half-mile away. And then, when the hoofbeats grew more distant, there came again the echo of voices up above. Was it not over yet? Dear God, would it never end? He felt that a few moments more of this immersion, and he should be done for utterly. His numbness must rob him of the power to cross the moat. Suddenly the first welcome sound he had heard that night came to his ears. Chains creaked, hinges groaned, and the great black pall above him began gradually to rise. Faster it went, till at last it fell back into position, flat with the wall of the chateau, and such little light as there was from a moon was beating down upon his frozen face. He let the chain go, and, with strokes swift and silent as he could contrive, he crossed the water. He clambered up the bank, almost bereft of strength. A moment he crouched there listening. Had he moved too soon? Had he been incautious? Nothing stirred behind him to confirm his fears. He crept softly across the hard ground of the road where he had landed. Then, when the yielding, silent turf was under his feet, he gave not another thought for his numbness, but started to run as a man runs in a nightmare. So little did the speed of his movements match the pace of his desire to set a distance between himself and Condillac. Chapter 19. Through the night. It wanted something over an hour to midnight when Monsieur de Garnache started out in his sodden clothes to run from Condillac. He bore away to the north, and continued running until he had covered a mile or so, when perforce he must slacken his pace lest presently he should have to give way to utter exhaustion. He trudged on bravely thereafter at a good, swinging pace, realizing that in moving briskly lay his salvation from such ill effects as might otherwise attend his too long immersion. His run had set a pleasant glow upon his skin, and seemed to have thawed the frozen condition of his joints. Yet he could not disguise from himself that he was sorely worn by that night's happenings, and that, if he would reach his goal, he must carefully husband such strength as yet remained him. That goal of his was Voiron, some 4 leagues distant to north, where at the end of the Beau Paon his man, Rebec, should be lodged, ready for his coming at any time. Once already, when repairing to Condillac, he had traveled by that road, and it was so direct that there seemed scant fear of his mistaking it. On he plodded through the night, his way lighted for him by the crescent moon, the air so still that, despite his wet garments, being warmed as he was by his brisk movements, he never felt the cold of it. He had overheard enough of what had been said by Marius de Valerie to understand the business that was afoot for the morrow, and he doubted him that he had not sufficiently injured the dowager's son to make him refrain from or adjourn his murderous ride across the border into Savoy. Garnache's purpose now was to reach Voiron, there to snatch a brief rest, and then, equipped anew, to set out with his man for La Rochette and anticipate the fell plans of Marius and Fortunio. He might have experienced elation at his almost miraculous escape, and at the circumstance that he was still at large to carry this duel with the Condillacs to a fitting finish, were it not for the reflection that but for his besetting sin of hastiness, he might now be traveling in dry garments toward La Rochette, with Mademoiselle beside him. Once again that rash temper of his had marred an enterprise that was on the point of succeeding, and yet, even as he regretted his rashness, rage stirred him again at the thought of Marius crushing that slender shape against him and seeking to force his odious kisses upon her pure, immaculate lips. And then the thought of her, left behind at Condillac at the mercy of Marius, and that she deviled the Marquise, and the fears that a sudden leapt up in his mind, brought him to a standstill, as though he were contemplating the incomparable folly of a return. He beat his hands together for a moment in a frenzy of anguish. He threw back his head and raised his eyes to the sky above with a burst of imprecations on his lips. And then reflection brought him peace. No, they dare offer her no hurt. To do so must irrevocably lose them La Vouvray, and it was their covetousness had made them villains. Upon that covetousness did their villainy rest, and he need fear from them no wanton ruthlessness that should endanger their chance of profit. He trudged on, reassured. He had been a fool so to give way to fear. As great a fool as he had been when he laid hands on Marius to quell his excessive amorousness. Dieu! Was he bewitched? What ailed him? Again he paused there in the night, to think the situation out. A dozen thoughts, all centered about Valerie, came crowding in upon his brain, till in the end a great burst of laughter, the laughter of a madman almost eerie and terrific as it rang upon the silent night, broke from his parted lips. That brief moment of introspection had revealed him to himself, and the revelation had fetched that peal of mocking laughter from him. He realized now, at last, that not because the Queen had ordered him to procure Mademoiselle de la Vauvre's enlargement had he submitted to assume a filthy travesty, to set his neck in jeopardy, to play the lackey and the spy. It was because something in Valerie's eyes, something in her pure, lily face had moved him to it, and simultaneously had come the thought of the relation in which she stood to that man at La Rochette whose life he now sought to save for her, and had stabbed him with bitterness no misfortune, no failure yet had brought him. He trudged on, knowing himself for what he was, a fool who, after close upon 40 years of a strenuous life in which no petticoat had played a part, was come under the spell of a pair of innocent eyes belonging to a child almost young enough to have been his daughter. He despised himself a little for his weakness. He despised himself for his apostasy from the faith that had governed his life, the faith to keep himself immune from the folly to which womanhood had driven so many a stout man. And yet, mock himself, despise himself as he would, a great tenderness, a great desire grew strong in his soul that night as he trudged on toward distant Voiron. Mile after mile her image kept him company, and once, when he had left Voiron behind him, the greater portion of his journey done, some devil whispered in his ear that he was weary, that he would be over-weary on the morrow for any ride to La Rochette. He had done all that mortal man could do. Let him rest tomorrow whilst Marius and Fortunio accomplished by Florimond what the fever had begun. A cold perspiration broke on him as he wrestled with that grim temptation. Valerie was his. She belonged to him by the right of danger shared. Never had mother in her labors been nearer death for the offspring's sake than had he for Valerie during the days that were sped and the hours that were but gone. She belonged to him by the title of those dangers he had been through. What had Florimond done to establish his claim to her? He had remained absent during long years, a warring in a foreign land. With how many banal loves might not the fellow in that time have strewn his soldier's path? Garnash knew well how close does Cupid stalk and wake of Mars, knew well the way of these gay soldiers and the lightness of their loves. Was then this fellow to come now and claim her when perils were past, when there was naught left to do but lead her to the altar? Could he be worthy of such a pearl of womanhood, this laggard who, because a fever touched him, sat him down and in within a few hours' ride of her to rest him, as though the world held no such woman as Valerie? And she herself, by what ties was she bound to him? By the ties of an old promise, given at an age when she knew not what love meant. He had talked of it with her, and he knew how dispassionately she awaited Florimond's return. Florimond might be betrothed to her. Her father and his had encompassed that between them, but no lover of hers was he. Thus far did his thoughts journey, and temptation gripped him ever more and more strongly. And then his manhood and his honor awoke with shudder, as awakens a man from an ugly dream. What manner of fool was he? He asked himself again. Upon what presumptions did he base his silly musings? Did he suppose that even were there no Florimond, it would be left for a harsh, war-worn old graybeard such as he to awaken tenderness in the bosom of that child? The tenderness of friendship, perhaps. She had confessed to that, but the tenderness of her sweet love must be won by a younger, comelier man. If love had indeed touched him at last, let him be worthy of it and of her who inspired it. Let him strain every sinew in her service, asking no guerdon. Let him save the life of the man to whom she was affianced. Let him save her from the clutches of the Marquise de Condillac and her beautiful and scrupulous son. He put his folly from him and went on, seeking to hold his mind to the planning of his tomorrow's journey and its business. He had no means to know that that very hour Valerie was on her knees by her little white bed, in the northern tower of Condillac, praying for the repose of the soul of Monsieur de Garnache, the bravest gentleman, the noblest friend she had ever known. For she had counted him dead, and she thought with horror of his body lying in the slime under the cold waters of the moat beneath the window of her antechamber. A change seemed to have come upon her. Her soul was numb. Her courage seemed dead, and little care had she in that hour what might betide her now. Florimond was coming. She remembered. Coming to wed her. Ah, well, it mattered little, since Monsieur de Garnache was dead, as though it could have mattered had he been living. 3 hours of his long striding brought Garnash at last of Warone, and the echo of his footsteps rang through the silent streets and scared a stray cat or two that were praying out of doors. There was no watch in the little township and no lights, but by the moon's faint glimmer Garnash sought the inn of the Beau Paon, and found it at the end of a little wandering. A gaudy peacock, with tail spread wide, was the sign above the door on which he thumped and kicked as if he would have beaten it down. It opened after some delay, and a man half-clad, candle in hand, a nightcap on his hoary locks, showed an angry face at the opening. At sight of the gaunt, bedraggled figure that craved admittance, the landlord would have shut the door again, fearing that he had to do with some wild bandit from the hills. But Garnash thrust his foot in the way. "There's a man named Rebec from Paris, lodging here. I must have instant speech with him," said he. And his words, together with the crisp, commanding tones in which they were uttered, had their effect upon the host. Rebec had been playing the great lord during the week he had spent at Varone, and had known how to command a certain deference and regard. That this tatterdemalion, with a haughty voice, should demand to see him at that hour of the night, with such scant unconcern of how far he might incommode the great Monsieur Rebec, earned for him to a certain measure regard, though still alloyed with some suspicion. The landlord bade him enter. He did not know whether Monsieur Rebec would forgive him for being disturbed. He could not say whether Monsieur Rebec would consent to see this visitor at such an hour. Very probably he would not. Still, Monsieur might enter. Garnash cut him short before he had half done, announced his name, and bade him convey it to Rebec. The alacrity with which the lackey stirred from his bed upon hearing who it was that had arrived impressed the host not a little, but not half so much as impressed him presently to observe the deference with which this great Monsieur Rebec of Paris confronted the scarecrow below stairs when he was brought into its presence. "You are safe and sound, monsieur," he cried, in deferential joy. "Aye, by a miracle, mon fils," Garnash answered him with a short laugh. "Help me to bed, then bring me a cup of spice wine. I have swum a moat and done other wonders in these clothes." The host and Rebec bustled now to minister to his want between them, and when, jaded and worn, Garnash lay at last between good-smelling sheets with a feeling in him that he was like to sleep until the day of judgment, he issued his final orders. "Awake me at daybreak, Rebec," said he drowsily. "We must be stirring then. Have horse ready and clothes for me. I shall need you to wash me clean and shave me and make me what I was before your tricks and dyes turn me into what I have been this week and more. Take away the light. At daybreak. Don't let me sleep beyond that, as you value your place with me. We shall have brisk work tomorrow. At daybreak, Rebec." Chapter 20. Florimond de Condillac. It was noon of the next day when two horsemen gained the heights above La Rochette and paused to breathe their nags and take a survey of the little township in the plain at their feet. One of these was Monsieur de Garnash. The other was his man Rebec. But it was no longer the travestied Garnash that Condillac had known as Batista during the past days. It was that gentleman as he had been when first he presented himself at the chateau. Rebec had shaved him, and by means of certain unguents had cleansed the skin and hair of the dyes with which he had earlier overlaid them. That metamorphosis of itself was enough to set Garnash in a good humor. He felt himself again, and the feeling gave him confidence. His mustachios bristled as fiercely as of old, his skin was clear and healthy, and his dark brown hair showed ashen at the temples. He was becomingly arrayed in a suit of dark brown camlet, with rows of close-set gold buttons running up his hanging sleeves. A leather jerkin hid much of his finery, and his great boots encased his legs. He wore a brown hat, with a talus crown and a red feather, and Rebec carried his cloak for him, for the persistent St. Martin's summer rendered that day in November rather as one of early autumn. A flood of sunshine descended from a cloudless sky to drench the country at their feet, and all about them the trees preserved a green that was but little touched by autumnal browning. A while he paused there on the heights. Then he gave his horse a touch of the spur, and they started down the winding road that led into La Rochette. A half hour later, they were riding under the porte cochere of the Inn of the Black Boar. Of the ostler who hastened forward to take their reins, Monsieur de Garnash inquired if the Marquis de Condillac were lodged there. He was answered in the affirmative, and he got down at once from his horse. Indeed, but for the formality of the thing, he might have spared himself the question, for lounging about the courtyard were a score of stalwart weather-tanned fellows, whose air and accoutrements proclaimed them soldiers. It required little shrewdness to guess in them the personal followers of the Marquis, the remainder of the little troop that followed the young seigneur to the wars when, some 3 years ago, he had set out from Condillac. Garnash gave orders for the horses to be cared for, and bade Rebecca get himself fed in the common room. Heralded by the host, the Parisian then mounted the stairs to Monsieur de Condillac's apartments. The landlord led the way to the inn's best room, turned the handle, and, throwing wide the door, stood aside for Monsieur de Garnash to enter. From within the chamber came the sound of a scuffle, a man's soft laugh, and a girl's softer intercession. "Let me go, monsieur. Of your pity, let me go. Someone is coming." "And what care I who comes?" answered a voice that seemed oppressed by laughter. Garnash strode into the chamber, spacious and handsomely furnished as became the best room of the Auberge du Saint-Lenoir, to find a meal spread on the table, steaming with an odor promising of good things, but neglected by the guests with charms of a serving wench, whose waist he had imprisoned. As Garnash's tall figure loomed before him, he let the girl go and turned a half-laughing, half-startled face upon the intruder. "Who the devil may you be?" he inquired, and the brown eye, rakish and roving in its glance, played briskly over Parisian, whilst Garnash himself returned the compliment, and calmly surveyed this florid gentleman of middle height with the fair hair and regular features. The girl scurried by and darted from the room, dodging the smiting hand which the host raised as she flew past him. The Parisian felt his gorge rising. Was this the sore fever that had kept Monsieur le Marquis at La Rochette, whilst Mademoiselle was suffering endurance at Condillac? His last night's jealous speculations touching a man he did not know had leastways led him into no exaggeration. He found just such a man as he had pictured, a lightly loving, pleasure-taking roisterer, with never a thought beyond the amusement which the hour afforded him. With curling lip, Garnash bowed stiffly, and in a cold, formal voice he announced himself. "My name is Martin Marie Rigobert de Garnash. I am an emissary dispatched from Paris by Her Majesty the Queen Mother to procure the enlargement of Mademoiselle Lavouvre from the durance in which she is held by Madame your stepmother." The pleasant gentleman's eyebrows went up. A smile that was almost insolent broke on his face. "That being so, monsieur, why the devil are you here?" "I am here, monsieur," answered him Garnash, throwing back his head, his nostrils quivering, "because you are not at Condillac." The tone was truculent to the point of defiance, for despite the firm resolve he had taken last night never again to let his temper overmaster him, already Garnash's self-control was slipping away. The Marquis noted the tone and observed the man. In their way he liked both. In their way he disliked both. But he clearly saw that this peppery gentleman must be treated less cavalierly, or trouble would come of it. So he waved him gracefully to the table, where a brace of flagons stood amid the steaming viands. "You will dine with me, monsieur," said he, the utmost politeness marking his utterance now. "I take it that since you have come here in quest of me you have something to tell me. Shall we talk as we eat? I detest a lonely meal." The florid gentleman's tone and manner were mollifying in the extreme. Garnash had risen early and ridden far. The smell of the viands had quickened an appetite already very keen. Moreover, since he and this gentleman were to be allies, it was as well they should not begin by quarreling. He bowed less stiffly, expressed his willingness and his thanks, laid hat and whip and cloak aside, unbuckled and set down his sword, and that done, took at table the place which his host himself prepared him. Garnash took more careful stock of the Marquis now. He found much to like in his countenance. It was frank and jovial, obviously that a sensualist, but leastways an honest sensualist. He was dressed in black, as became a man who mourned his father, yet with a striking richness of material, whilst his broad collar of fine point and the lace cuffs of his doublet were worth a fortune. What time they ate, Monsieur de Garnash told of his journey from Paris, and of his dealings with Tresaint, and his subsequent adventures at Condillac. He dwelt passingly upon the manner in which they had treated him, and found it difficult to choose words to express the reason for his returning in disguise to play the knight-errant to Valerie. He passed on to speak of last night's happenings and of his escape. Throughout, the Marquis heard him with a grave countenance and a sober, attentive glance, yet, when he had finished, a smile crept round the sensual lips. "The letter that I had at Milan prepared me for some such trouble as this," said he, and Garnash was amazed at the lightness of his tone, just as he had been amazed to see the fellow keep his countenance at the narrative of Mademoiselle's position. I guess that my beautiful stepmother intended me some such scurviness from the circumstance of her having kept me in ignorance of my father's death. But frankly, sir, your tale by far outstrips my wildest imaginings. You have behaved very, very bravely in this affair. You seem, in fact, to have taken a greater interest in Mademoiselle de la Vauvray's enlargement than the Queen could have a right to expect of you. And he smiled, a world of suggestion in his eyes. Garnash sat back in his chair and stared at the man. This levity, monsieur, on such a subject, leaves me thunderstruck, he said at last. Diable, laughed the other. You are too prone, after your trials, to view its tragic rather than its comic side. Forgive me if I am smitten only with the humor of the thing. The humor of the thing, gurgled Garnash, his eyes starting for his head. Then out leapt that temper of his like an eager hound that has been suddenly unleashed. He brought down his clenched hand upon the table, caught in passing a flagon, and sent it crashing to the floor. If there was a table near at hand when his temper went, he never failed to treat it so. Par la mordieu. Monsieur, you see but the humor of it, do you? And what of that poor child who is lying there, suffering this incarceration because of her fidelity to a promise given you? The statement was hardly fully accurate, but it served its purpose. The other's face became instantly grave. Calm yourself, I beg, monsieur, he cried, raising a soothing hand. I have offended you somewhere. That is plain. There is something here that I do not altogether understand. You say that Valerie has suffered on account of a promise given me? To what are you referring? They hold her a prisoner, monsieur, because they wish to wed her to Marius, answered Garnash, striving hard to cool his anger. Parfaitement. That much I understood. Well, then, monsieur, is the rest not plain? Because she is betrothed to you, he paused. He saw, at last, that he was stating something not altogether accurate, but the other took his meaning there and then, lay back in his chair, and burst out laughing. The blood hummed through Garnash's head as he tightened his lips and watched this gentleman indulge his inexplicable mirth. Surely Monsieur de Condillac was possessed of the keenest sense of humor in all France. He laughed with a will, and Garnash sent up a devout prayer that the laugh might choke him. The noise of it filled the hostelry. Sir, said Garnash, with an ever-increasing tartness, there's a byword has it much laughter, little wit. In confidence, one, is that your case, monsieur? The other looked at him soberly a moment, then went off again. Monsieur, monsieur, he gasped, you'll be the death of me? For the love of heaven, look less fierce. Is it my fault that I must laugh? The folly of it all is so colossal. 3 years from home, yet there's a woman keeps faithful and holds to a promise given for her. Come, monsieur, you have seen the world. You must agree that there's in this something that is passing singular, extravagantly amusing. My poor little Valerie, he spluttered through his half-checked mirth. Does she wait for me still? Does she count me still betrothed to her? And because of that, says no to brother Marius. Death of my life. I shall die of it. I have a notion that you may, monsieur, rasped Garnash's voice, and with it rasped Garnash's chair upon the boards. He had risen, and he was confronting his merry host very fiercely, white to the lips, his eyes aflame. There was no mistaking his attitude, no mistaking his words. Eh, gasped the other, recovering himself at last and envisaged what appeared to develop into a serious situation. Monsieur, said Garnash, his voice very cold, do I understand that you no longer intend to carry out your engagement and wed Mademoiselle de la Vauvray? A dull flush spread upon the Marquis's face. He rose too, and across the table he confronted his guest, his mien haughty, his eyes imperious. I thought, monsieur, said he with a great dignity, I thought when I invited you to sit at my table that your business was to serve me, however little I might be conscious of having merited the honor. It seems instead that you are come hither to affront me. You are my guest, monsieur. Let me beg that you will depart before I present a question on a matter which concerns myself alone. The man was right, and Garnash was wrong. He had no title to take up the affairs of Mademoiselle de la Vauvray, but he was past reason now, and he was not the man to brook haughtiness, however courteously it might be cloaked. He eyed the Marquis's flushed ace across the board, and his lip curled. Monsieur, said he, I take your meaning very fully. Half a word with me is as good as a whole sentence with another. You have dubbed me in polite phrases an impertinent. That I am not, and I resent the imputation. Oh, that, said the Marquis with a half-laugh and shrug. If you resent it, his smile and his gesture made the rest plain. Exactly, monsieur, was Garnash's answer. But I do not fight sick men. Florimond's brows grew wrinkled, his eyes puzzled. Sick men, he echoed. A while ago, monsieur, you appeared to cast a doubt upon my sanity. Is it a case of the drunkard who thinks all the world drunk but himself? Garnash gazed at him. That doubt he had entertained grew now into something like assurance. I know not whether it is the fever makes your tongue run so, he began, when the other broke in, a sudden light of understanding in his eyes. You are at fault, he cried. I have no fever. But then your letter to Condillac, demanded Garnash, lost now in utter amazement. What of it? I'll swear I never said I had a fever. I'll swear you did. You'd give me the lie, then? But Garnash waved his hands, as if he implored the other to have done with giving and taking offense. There was some misunderstanding somewhere, he realized, and sheer astonishment had cooled his anger. His only aim now was to have this obscure thing made clear. No, no, he cried. I am seeking enlightenment. Florimond smiled. I may have said that we were detained by a fever, but I never said the patient was myself. Who then? Who else? Cried Garnash. Why, now I understand, monsieur, but it is my wife who has the fever. Garnash dared not trust himself to utter the word. My wife, monsieur, the Marquis repeated. The journey proved too much for her, traveling at the rate she did. A silence fell. Garnash's long chin sank onto his breast, and he stood there, his eyes upon the tablecloth, his thoughts with the poor innocent child who waited at Condillac, so full of trust and faith and loyalty to this betrothed of hers who had come home with a wife out of Italy. And then, while he stood so and Florimond was regarding him curiously, the door opened and the host appeared. Monsieur le Marquis, said he, there are 2 gentlemen below asking to see you. One of them is Monsieur Marius de Condillac. Marius? Cried the Marquis, and he started round with frown. Marius? Breathed Garnash, and then, realizing that the assassins had followed so close upon his heels, he put all thoughts from his mind other than that of the immediate business. He had, himself, a score to settle with them. The time was now. He swung round on his heel, and before he knew what he had said, the words were out. Bring them up, Monsieur Hôte. Florimond looked at him in surprise. Oh, by all means, if monsieur wishes it, said he with fine irony. Garnash looked at him, then back at the hesitating host. You have heard, said he coolly. Bring them up. Bien, monsieur, replied the host, withdrawing and closing the door after him. Your interference in my affairs grows really droll, monsieur, said the Marquis tartly. When you shall learn to what purpose I am interfering, you'll find it possibly not quite so droll, was the answer, no less tart. We have but a moment, monsieur. Listen while I tell you the nature of their errand. Chapter 21. The Ghost in the Cupboard. Garnash had but a few minutes in which to unfold his story, and he needed, in addition, a second or two in which to ponder the situation as he now found it. His first reflection was that Florimond, since he was now married, might perhaps, instead of proving Valerie's savior from Marius, join forces with his brother in coercing her into this alliance with him. But from what Valerie herself had told him, he was inclined to think more favorably of Florimond and to suppress such doubts as these. Still, he could incur no risks. His business was to serve Valerie and Valerie only, to procure at all costs her permanent liberation from the power of the Condillacs. To make sure of this, he must play upon Florimond's anger, letting him know that Marius had journeyed to La Rochette for the purpose of murdering his half-brother, that he but sought to murder him to the end that he might be removed from his path to Valerie, was a circumstance that need not too prominently be presented. Still, presented it must be, for Florimond would require to know by what motive his brother was impelled ere he could credit him capable of such villainy. Succinctly, but tellingly, Garnash brought out the story of the plot that had been laid for Florimond's assassination, and it joyed him to see the anger rising in the Marquis's face and flashing from his eyes. What reason have they for so damnable a deed? He cried, between incredulity and indignation. Their overweening ambition. Marius covets Mademoiselle de la Vauvre's estates, And to gain his ends, he would not stop at murdering me? Is it indeed the truth you tell me? I pledge my honor for the truth of it, answered Garnash, watching him closely. Florimond looked at him a moment. The steady glance of those blue eyes and the steady tone of that crisp voice scattered his last doubt. The villains, cried the Marquis. The fools, he added. For me, Marius had been welcome to Valerie. He might have found in me an ally to aid him in the urging of his suit. But now, he raised his clenched hand and shook in the air, as if in promise of the battle he would deliver. Good, said Garnash, reassured. I hear their steps upon the stairs. They must not find me with you. A moment later the door opened, and Marius, very bravely arrayed, entered the room, followed closely by Fortunio. Neither showed much effect of last night's happenings, save for a long dark brown scar that ran athwart the captain's cheek, where Garnash's sword had plowed it. They found Florimond seated quietly at table, and as they entered he rose and came forward with a friendly smile to greet his brother. His sense of humor was being excited. He was something of an actor, and the role he had adopted in the comedy to be played gave him a certain grim satisfaction. He would test for himself the truth of what Monsieur de Garnash had told him concerning his brother's intentions. Marius received his advances very coolly. He took his brother's hand, submitted to his brother's kiss, but neither kiss nor hand pressure did he return. Florimond affected not to notice this. You are well, my dear Marius, I hope, said he, and thrusting him out at arm's length, he held him by the shoulders and regarded him critically. Ma evoi, but you are changed into a comely, well-grown man. And your mother, she is well, too, I trust. I thank you. Florimond, she is well, said Marius stiffly. The Marquis took his hands from his brother's shoulders, his florid, good-natured face smiling ever, as if this were the happiest moment of his life. It is good to see France again, my dear Marius, he told his brother. I was a fool to have remained away so long. I am pining to be at Condillac once more. Marius, eyeing him, looked in vain for signs of the fever. He had expected to find a debilitated, emaciated man. Instead, he saw a very lusty, healthy, hearty fellow, full of good humor and seemingly full of strength. He began to like his purpose less, despite such encouragement as he gathered from the support of Fortunio. Still, it must be gone through with. You wrote us that you had the fever, he said, half inquiringly. Pooh, that is naught. And Florimond snapped a strong finger against a stronger thumb. But whom have you with you, he asked, and his eyes took the measure of Fortunio, standing a pace or two behind his master. Marius presented his bravo. This is Captain Fortunio, the commander of our garrison of Condillac. The Marquis nodded good-humoredly towards the captain. Captain Fortunio? He is well named for a soldier of fortune. My brother, no doubt, will have family matters to tell me of. If you will step below Monsieur le Capitaine and drink a health or so while you wait, I shall be honored. The captain, nonplussed, looked at Marius, and Florimond surprised the look. But Marius's manner became still chillier. Fortunio here, said he, and he half turned and let his hand fall on the captain's shoulder, is my very good friend. I have no secrets from him. The instant lift of Florimond's eyebrows was full of insolent, supercilious disdain. Yet Marius did not fasten his quarrel upon that. He had come to La Rochette resolved that any pretext would serve his turn. But the sight of his brother so inflamed his jealousy that he had now determined that the quarrel should be picked on the actual ground in which it had its roots. Oh, as you will, said the Marquis coolly. Perhaps your friend will be seated, and you, too, my dear Marius. And he played the host of them with a brisk charm, setting chairs. He forced them to sit and pressed wine upon them. Marius cast his hat and cloak on the chair where Garnash's had been left. The Parisian's hat and cloak he naturally assumed to belong to his brother. The smashed flagon and the mess of wine upon the floor he scarce observed, setting it down to some clumsiness, either his brother's or servants'. They both drank, Marius in silence, the captain with a toast. Your good return, Monsieur le Marquis, said he, and Florimond thanked him by an inclination of the head. Then, turning to Marius, and so, he said, you have a garrison at Condillac. What the devil has been taking place there? I have had some odd news of you. It would almost seem as if you were setting up as rebels in our quiet little corner of Dauphiny. Marius shrugged his shoulders. His face suggested that he was ill-humored. Madame the Queen Regent has seen fit to interfere in our concerns. We Condillacs do not lightly brook interference. Florimond showed his teeth in a pleasant smile. That is true, that is very true, pardieu. But what warranted this action of Her Majesty's? Marius felt that the time for deeds was come. This fatuous conversation was but a futile waste of time. He set down his glass, and sitting back his chair, he fixed his sullen black eyes full upon his half-brother's smiling brown ones. "I think we have exchanged compliment enough," said he, and Fortunio wagged his head approvingly. There were too many men in the courtyard for his liking, and the more time they waited, the more likely were they to suffer interruption. Their aim must to get the thing done quickly, and then quickly to depart before an alarm could be raised. Our trouble at Condillac concerns Mademoiselle de la Vauvray. Florimond started forward, with a ready assumption of lover-like solicitude. "No harm has come to her," he cried. "Tell me that no harm has come to her." "Reassure yourself," answered Marius, with a sneer, a grayness that was of jealous rage overspreading his face. "No harm has come to her whatever. The trouble was that I sought to wed her, and she, because she is betrothed to you, would have none of me. So we brought her to Condillac, hoping always to persuade her. You will remember that she was under my mother's tutelage. The girl, however, could not be constrained. She suborned one of our men to bear a letter to Paris for her, and in answer to it the Queen sent a hot-headed, rash blunder down to Dauphiny to procure her liberation. He lies now at the bottom of the moat of Condillac." Florimond's face had assumed a look of horror and indignation. "Do you dare tell me this?" he cried. "Dare?" answered Marius, with an ugly laugh. "Men enough have died over this affair already. That fellow Garnash left some bodies on our hands last night before he set out for another world himself. You little dream how far my daring goes in this matter. I'll add as many more as need be to the death roll that we have already, before you set foot in Condillac." "Ah!" said Florimond, as one upon whose mind a light breaks suddenly. "So, that is the business on which you come to me. I doubted your brotherliness, I must confess, my dear Marius. But tell me, brother mine, what of our father's wishes in this matter? Have you no respect for those?" "What respect had you?" flashed back Marius, his voice now raised in anger. "Was it like a lover to remain away for 3 years, to let all that time go by without ever a word from you to your betrothed? What have you done to make good your claim to her?" "Nothing, I confess, yet—" "Well, you shall do something now," exclaimed Marius, rising. "I am here to afford you the opportunity. If you would still win Mademoiselle de la Vauvray, you shall win her from me at point of sword. Fortunio, see to the door." "Wait, Marius!" cried Florimond, and he looked genuinely aghast. "Do not forget that we are brothers, men of the same blood, that my father was your father." "I choose to remember rather that we are rivals," answered Marius, and he drew his rapier. Fortunio turned the key in the lock. Florimond gave his brother a long, searching look. Then with a sigh he picked up his sword where it lay ready to his hand and thoughtfully unsheathed it. Holding the hilt in one hand and the blade in the other, he stood, bending the weapon like a whip, whilst again he searchingly regarded his brother. "Hear me a moment," said he. "If you will force this unnatural quarrel upon me, at least let the thing be decently done. Not here, not in these cramped quarters, but out in the open let our meeting take place. If the captain there will act for you, I'll find a friend to do me the like service. We settle this matter here and now," Marius answered him, in a tone of calm finality. "But if I were to kill you—" Florimond began. "Reassure yourself," said Marius with an ugly smile. "Very well, then, either alternative will suit the case I wish to put. If you were to kill me, it may be ranked as murder. The irregularity of it could not be overlooked. The captain here will act for both of us." "I am entirely at your service, gentlemen," replied Fortunio pleasantly, bowing to each in turn. Florimond considered him. "I do not like his looks," he objected. "He may be the friend of your bosom, Marius. You may have no secrets from him. But for my part, frankly, I should prefer the presence of some friend of my own to keep his blade engaged. The Marquis's manner was affable in the extreme. Now that it was settled that they must fight, he appeared to have cast aside all scruples based upon their consanguinity, and he discussed the affair with the greatest bonhomie, as though he were disposing of a matter of how they should sit down to table. It gave them pause. The change was too abrupt. They did not like it. It was as the calm that screened some surprise. Yet it was impossible he should have been forewarned. Impossible he could have had word of how they proposed to deal with him. Marius shrugged his shoulders. "There is reason in what you say," he acknowledged, "but I am in haste. I cannot wait while you go in search of friend." "Why, then," he answered, with a careless laugh, "I must raise one from the dead." Both stared at him. Was he mad? Had the fever touched his brain? Was that healthy color but the brand of a malady that rendered him delirious? "Dieu, how you stare," he continued, laughing in their faces. "You shall see something to compensate you for your journey, messers. I have learned some odd tricks in Italy. They are a curious people beyond the Alps. What did you say was the name of the man the Queen had sent from Paris?" "He who lies at the bottom of the moat of Condillac." "Let there be an end to this jesting," growled Marius. "En garde, Monsieur le Marquis." "Patience, patience." Florimond implored him. "You shall have your way with me, I promise you. But of your charity, messers, tell me first the name of that man." "It was Garnash," said Fortunio, "and if the information will serve you, it was I who slew him." "You!" cried Florimond. "Tell me of it, I beg you." "Do you fool us?" questioned Marius in a rage that overmastered his astonishment, his growing suspicion that here all was not quite as it seemed. "Fool you? But no. I do but wish to show you something that I learned in Italy. Tell me how you slew him, Monsieur le Capitaine." "I think we are wasting time," said the captain, angry too. He felt that this smiling gentleman was deriding the pair of them. It crossed his mind that for some purpose of his own the Marquis was seeking to gain time. He drew his sword. Florimond saw the act, watched it, and his eyes twinkled. Suddenly Marius's sword shot out at him. He leapt back beyond the table and threw himself on guard, his lips still wreathed in their mysterious smile. "The time has come, messers," said he. "I should have preferred to know more of how you slew that Monsieur de Garnache. But since you deny me the information, I shall do my best without it. I'll try to conjure up his ghost, to keep you entertained, Monsieur le Capitaine." And then, raising his voice, his sword, engaging now his brothers. "Hola, Monsieur de Garnache," he cried. "To me." And then it seemed to those assassins that the Marquis had been neither mad nor boastful when he had spoken of strange things he had learned beyond the Alps, or else it was they themselves were turned light-headed, for the doors of the cupboard at the far end of the room flew open suddenly, and from between them stepped the stalwart figure of Martin de Garnache, a grim smile lifting the corners of his mustachios, a naked sword in his hand, flashing back the sunlight that flooded through the window. They paused, aghast, and they turned ashen, and then in the mind of each arose the same explanation of this phenomenon. This Garnache wore the appearance of the man who had announced himself by that name when he came to Condillac a fortnight ago. Then the sallow, black-haired knave who had last night proclaimed himself as Garnache in disguise was some impostor. That was a conclusion they promptly arrived at, and however greatly they might be dismayed by the appearance of this ally of Florimond's, yet the conclusion heartened them anew. But scarce had they arrived at it, when Monsieur de Garnache's crisp voice came swiftly to dispel it. "Monsieur le Capitaine," it said, and Fortunio shivered at the sound, for it was a voice he had heard but a few hours ago. "I welcome the opportunity of resuming our last night's interrupted swordplay." And he advanced deliberately. Marius's sword had fallen away from his brother's, and the two combatants stood pausing. Fortunio, without more ado, made for the door, but Garnache crossed the intervening space in a bound. "Turn," he cried, "turn, or I'll put my sword through your back. The door shall serve you presently, but it is odds that it will need a couple of men to bear you through it. Look to your dirty skin." Chapter 22. The Offices of Mother Church. A couple of hours after the engagement in the Marquis de Condillac's apartments at the Seigneur Noir at La Rochette, Monsieur de Garnache, attended only by Rebecque, rode briskly into France once more and made for the little town of Calas, which is on a road that leads down to the valley of the Isère and the Condillac. But not as far as the township did he journey. On a hill, the slopes all cultivated into an opulent vineyard. Some 2 miles east of Cala's stood the low, square gray building of the convent of St. Francis. Thither did Monsieur de Garnache bend his horse's steps. Up the long white road that crept zigzag through Franciscan's vineyards rode the Parisian and his servant under the welcome sunshine of that November afternoon. Garnache's face was gloomy and his eyes sad, for his thoughts were all of Valerie, and he was prey to 100 anxieties regarding her. They gained the heights at last, and Rebecque got down to beat with his whip upon the convent gates. A lay brother came to open, and in reply to Garnache's request that he might have a word with the father abbot, invited him to enter through the cloisters about the great quadrangle, where a couple of monks, their habits girt high as their knees, were busy at gardener's work. Garnache followed his conductor and up the steps to the abbot's chamber. The master of the convent of St. Francis of Cala's, a tall, lean man with an ascetic face, prominent cheekbones, and a nose not unlike Garnache's own, the nose of a man of action rather than a prayer, bowed gravely to the stalwart stranger, and in courteous accents begged to be informed in what he might serve him. Hat in hand, Garnache took a step forward in that bare, scantily furnished little room, permeated by the faint, wax-like odor that is peculiar to the abode of conventuals. Without hesitation, he stated the reason of his visit. "Father," said he, "a son of the house of Condillac met his end this morning at La Rochette." The monk's eyes seemed to quicken, as though his interest in the outer world had suddenly revived. "It is the hand of God," he cried. "Their evil ways have provoked at last the anger of heaven. How did this unfortunate meet his death?" Garnache shrugged his shoulders. "De mortuis nil nisi bonum," said he. His air was grave, his blue eyes solemn, and the abbot had little cause to suspect the closeness with which that pair of eyes was watching him. He colored faintly at the implied rebuke, but he inclined his head as if submissive to the correction, and waited for the other to proceed. "There is the need, father, to give his body burial," said Garnache gently, but that the monk raised his head, and a deeper flush, the flush of anger, spread now upon his sallow cheeks. Garnache observed it, and was glad. "Why do you come to me?" he asked. "Why?" echoed Garnache, and there was hesitancy now in his voice. "Is not the burial of the dead enjoined by Mother Church? Is it not a part of your sacred office?" "You ask me this as you would challenge my reply," said the monk, shaking his head. "It is as you say, but it is not within our office to bury the impious dead, nor those who in life were excommunicate and died without repentance." "How can you assume he died without repentance?" "I do not, but I assume he died without absolution, for there is no priest who, knowing his name, would dare to shrive him, and if one should do it in ignorance of his name and excommunication, why then it is not done at all. Bid others bury the son of the house of Condillac. It matters no more by what hands or in what ground he be buried than if it were the horse he rode or the hound that followed him." "The Church is very harsh, father," said Garnache sternly. "The Church is very just," the priest answered him, more sternly still, a holy wrath kindling his somber eyes. "He was in life a powerful noble," said Garnache thoughtfully. "It is but fitting that, being dead, honor and reverence should be shown his body. Then let those who have themselves been honored by the Condillacs honor this dead Condillac now. The Church is not of that number, monsieur. Since the late Marquis's death, the house of Condillac has been in rebellion against us. Our priests have been maltreated, our authority flouted. They paid no tithes, approached no sacraments. Weary of their ungodliness, the Church placed its ban upon them. Under this ban it seems they die. My heart grieves for them, but—" He spread his hands, long and almost transparent in their leanness, and on his face a cloud of sorrow rested. "Nevertheless, father," said Garnache, 20 brothers of St. Francis shall bear the body home to Condillac, and you yourself shall head this grim procession." "I?" The monk shrank back before him, and his figure seemed to grow taller. "Who are you, sir, that say to me what I shall do, the Church's law despite?" Garnache took the abbot by the sleeve of his rough habit and drew him gently towards the window. There was a persuasive smile on his lips and in his keen eyes, which the monk, almost unconsciously, obeyed. "I will tell you," said Garnache, "and at the same time I shall seek to turn you from your harsh purpose." At the hour at which Monsieur de Garnache was seeking to persuade the abbot of St. Francis of Cales to adopt a point of view more kindly toward a dead man, Madame de Condillac was at dinner, and with her was Valerie de la Vauvray. Neither woman ate appreciably. The one was oppressed by sorrow, the other by anxiety, and the circumstance that they were both afflicted served perhaps to render the dowager gentler in her manner towards the girl. She watched the pale face and troubled eyes of Valerie. She observed the almost lifeless manner in which she came and went as she was bidden, as though a part of her had ceased to exist, and that part the part that matters most. It did cross her mind that in this condition mademoiselle might the more readily be bent to their will, but she dwelt not overlong upon that reflection. Rather was her mood charitable, no doubt because she felt herself in need of charity, the want of sympathy. She was tormented by fears altogether disproportionate to their cause. 100 times she told herself that no ill could befall Marius. Florimond was a sick man, and were he otherwise, there was still Fortunio to stand by and see to it that the right sword pierced the right heart, else would his pistoles be lost to him. Nevertheless, she was fretted by anxiety, and she waited impatiently for news, fuming at the delay, yet knowing full well that news could not yet reach her. Once she reproved Valerie for her lack of appetite, and there was in her voice a kindness Valerie had not heard for months, not since the old Marquis died. Nor did she hear it now, or, hearing it, she did not heed it. "You are not eating, child," the dowager said, and her eyes were gentle. Valerie looked up like one suddenly awakened, and in that moment her eyes filled with tears. It was as if the dowager's voice had opened the floodgates of her sorrow and let out the tears that hitherto had been repressed. The Marquise rose and waved the page and an attendant lackey from the room. She crossed to Valerie's side and put her arm about the girl's shoulder. "What ails you, child?" she asked. For a moment the girl suffered the caress. Almost she seemed to nestle closer to the dowager's shoulder. Then, as if understanding had come to her suddenly, she drew back and quietly disengaged herself from the other's arms. Her tears ceased. The quiver passed from her lip. "You are very good, madam," she said, with a coldness that rendered the courteous words almost insulting. "But nothing ails me save a wish to be alone." "You have been alone too much of late," the dowager answered, persisting in her wish to show kindness to Valerie. For all that, had she looked into her own heart, she might have been puzzled to find a reason for her mood, unless the reason lay in her own affliction of anxiety for Marius. "Perhaps I have," said the girl in the same cold, almost strained voice. "It was not by my own contriving." "Ah, but it was, child. Indeed it was. Had you been reasonable, you had found us kinder. We had never treated you as we have done, never made a prisoner of you." Valerie looked up into the beautiful ivory-white face, with its black eyes and singularly scarlet lips, and a wan smile raised the corners of her gentle mouth. "You had no right, none ever gave it you, to set constraint and restraint upon me." "I had, indeed I had," the Marquise answered her in a tone of sad protest. "Your father gave me such a right when he gave me charge of you. Was it a part of your charge to seek to turn me from my loyalty to Florimond, and endeavor to compel me by means gentle or ungentle into marriage with Marius? We thought Florimond dead, or if not dead, then certainly unworthy of you to leave you without news of him for years together. And if he was not dead then, it is odds he will be dead by now." The word slipped out almost unconsciously, and the Marquise bit her lip and straightened herself, fearing an explosion. But none came. The girl looked across the table at the fire that smoldered on the hearth in need of being replenished. "What do you mean, madam?" she asked, but her tone was listless, apathetic, as of one who, though uttering a question, is incurious as to what the answer may be. "We had news some days ago that he was journeying homewards, but that he was detained by fever at La Rochette. We have since heard that his fever has grown so serious that there is little hope of his recovery, and it was to solace his last moments that Monsieur Marius left Condillac this morning." The dowager looked sharply at the girl, but Valerie's face continued averted, her gaze resting on the fire. Her tone suggested nothing beyond a natural curiosity. "Yes," said the dowager. "Unless his own efforts to help his brother out of this world should prove insufficient, he took Captain Fortunio with him," said Valerie, in the same indifferent voice. "What do you mean?" the Marquise almost hissed into the girl's ear. Valerie turned to her, a faint color stirring in her white face. "Just what I have said. Madam, would you know what I prayed? All night was I upon my knees from the moment that I recovered consciousness, and my prayers were that heaven might see fit to let Florimond destroy your son. Not that I desire Florimond's return, for I care not if I never set eyes on him again. There is a curse upon this house, madam, the girl continued, rising from her chair and speaking now with greater animation, whilst the Marquise recoiled a step, her face strangely altered and suddenly gone gray, and I have prayed that that curse might be worked out upon that assassin, Marius. A fine husband, madam, you had thrust upon the daughter of Gaston de la Vauvray, and turning, without waiting for an answer, she moved slowly down the room and took her way to her own desolate apartments. So full of memories of him, she mourned of him. It seemed to her she must always mourn of him who lay dead in the black waters of the moat beneath her window. Stricken with a sudden, inexplicable terror, the dowager, who for all her spirit was not without a certain superstition, felt her knees loosen, and she sank limply into a chair. She was amazed at the extent of Valerie's knowledge and puzzled by it. She was amazed, too, at the seeming apathy of Valerie for the danger in which Florimond stood, and at her avowal that she did not care if she never again beheld him. But such amazement as came to her was whelmed fathoms deep in her sudden fears for Marius. If he should die, she grew cold at the thought, and she sat there, her hands folded in her lap, her face gray. That mention of the curse the church had put upon them had frozen her quick blood and turned her stout spirit to mere water. At last she rose and went out into the open to inquire if no messenger had yet arrived. For all that she knew, there was not yet time for any messenger to have reached the chateau. She mounted the winding staircase of stone that led to the ramparts, and there alone in the November sunshine, she paced to and fro for hours, waiting for news, straining her eyes to gaze up the valley of the Isère, watching for the horseman that must come that way. Then, as time sped on and the sun approached its setting, and still no one came, she bethought her that if harm had befallen Marius, none would ride that night to Condillac. This very delay seemed pregnant with news of disaster. And then she shook off her fears and tried to comfort herself. There was not yet time. Besides, what had she to fear from Marius? He was strong and quick, and Fortunio was by his side. A man was surely dead by now at La Rochette, but that man could not be Marius. At last, in the distance, she espied a moving object, and down on the silent air of eventide came the far-off rattle of a horse's hoofs. Someone was riding, galloping that way. He was returned at last. She leaned on the battlements, her breath coming in quick, short gasps, and watched the horseman growing larger with every stride of his horse. A mist was rising from the river, and it dimmed the figure, and she cursed the mist for heightening her anxiety, for straining further her impatience. Then a new fear was begotten in her mind. Why came one horseman only where two should have ridden? Who was it that returned, and what had befallen his companion? God send, at least it might be Marius who rode thus at such a breakneck pace. At last she could make him out. He was close to the chateau now, and she noticed that his right arm was bandaged and hanging in a sling. And then a scream broke from her, and she bit her lip hard to keep another in check, for she had seen the horseman's face, and it was Fortunio's. Fortunio and wounded. Then, assuredly, Marius was dead. She swayed where she stood. She set her hand on her bosom, above her heart, as if she would have repressed the beating of the one, the heaving of the other. Her soul sickened, and her mind seemed to turn numb, as she waited there for the news that should confirm her fears. The hoofs of his horse thundered over the planks of the drawbridge, and came clatteringly to halt as he harshly drew rein in the courtyard below. There was a sound of running feet, and men sprang to his assistance. Madame would have gone below to meet him, but her limbs seemed to refuse their office. She leaned against one of the merlons of the embattled parapet, her eyes on the spot where he should emerge from the stairs, and thus she waited, her eyes haggard, her face drawn. He came at last, lurching his walk, being overstiff from his long ride. She took a step forward to meet him. Her lips parted. "Well," she asked him, and her voice sounded harsh and strained. "How has the venture sped?" "The only way it could," he answered, "as you would wish it." At that she thought that she must faint. Her lungs seemed to rive for air, and she opened her lips and took long draughts of the rising mist, never speaking for a moment or two until she had sufficiently recovered from this tremendous revulsion from her fears. "Then where is Marius?" she asked at last. He has remained behind to accompany the body home. They are bringing it here." "They," she echoed. "Who are they?" "The monks of St. Francis of Cales," he answered. A something in his tone, a something in his shifty eyes, a cloud upon his fair and usually so ingenuous-looking countenance aroused her suspicions and gave her resurrected courage pause. She caught him viciously by the arms and forced his glance to meet her own in the fading daylight. "It is the truth you are telling me, Fortunio," she snapped, and her voice was half angry, half fearful. He faced her now, his eyes bold. He raised a hand to lend emphasis to his words. "I swear, madam, by my salvation, that Monsieur Marius is sound and well." She was satisfied. She released his arm. "Does he come tonight?" she asked. "They will be here tomorrow, madam. I rode on to tell you so." An odd fancy, this of his, but, and a sudden smile overspread her face, we may find more useful purpose for one of these monks. An hour ago, she would willingly have set Mademoiselle at liberty in exchange for the assurance that Marius had been successful in the business that had taken him over the border into Savoy. She would have done it gladly, content that Marius should be heir to Condillac. But now that Condillac was assured her son, she must have more for him. Her insatiable greed for his advancement and prosperity was again upon her. Now, more than ever, now that Florimond was dead, must she have La Vouvray for Marius, and she thought that Mademoiselle would no longer be difficult to bend. The child had fallen in love with that mad Garnash, and when a woman is cross in love, while her grief lasts, it matters little to her where she weds. Did she not know it out of the fund of her own bitter experience? Was it not that the compulsion her own father had employed to make her find a mate in a man so much older than herself as Condillac, that had warped her own nature and done much to make her what she was? A lover she had had, and whilst he lived she had resisted them, and stood out against this odious marriage that for convenience' sake they force upon her. He was killed in Paris in a duel, and when the news of it came to her, she had folded her hands and let them wed her to whom they listed. Of just such a dejection of spirit had she observed the signs in Valerie, let them profit by it while it lasted. They had been long enough without church ceremonies at Condillac. There should be 2 tomorrow to make up for the empty time, a wedding and a burial. She was going down the stairs, Fortunio a step behind her, when her mind reverted to the happening at La Rochette. "Was it well done?" she asked. "It made some stir," said he. "The Marquis had men with him, and had the affair taken place in France, ill might have come of it." "You shall give me a full account of it," said she, rightly thinking that there was still something to be explained. Then she laughed softly. "Yes, it was a lucky chance for us, his staying at La Rochette. Florimond was born under an unlucky star, I think, and you under a lucky one, Fortunio." "I think so, too, as regard myself," he answered grimly, and he thought of the sword that had plowed his cheek last night and pierced his sword arm that morning. And he thanked such gods as in his godlessness he owned for the luck that had kept that sword from finding out his heart. Chapter 23. The Judgment of Garnash. On the morrow, which was a Friday and the 10th of November, a date to be hereafter graven on the memory of all concerned in the affairs of Condillac, the dowager rose betimes, and for decency's sake, having in mind the business of the day, she gowned herself in black. Betimes, too, the Lord Seneschal rode out of Grenoble, attended by a couple of grooms, and headed for Condillac, in doing which little though he suspected it. He was serving nobody's interests more thoroughly than Monsieur de Garnach's. Madame received him courteously. She was in a blithe and happy mood that morning, the reaction from her yesterday's distress of mind. The world was full of promise, and all things had prospered with her and Marius. Her boy was lord of Condillac. Florimond, whom she had hated and who had stood in the way of her boy's advancement, was dead and on his way to burial. Garnash, the man from Paris who might have made trouble for them had he ridden home again with the tale of their resistance, was silenced for all time, and the carp in the moat would be feasting by now upon what was left of him. Valerie de la Vouvray was in a dejected frame of mind that augured well for the success of the dowager's plans concerning her, and by noon at latest there would be priests at Condillac, and if Marius still wished to marry the obstinate baggage, there would be no difficulty as to that. It was a glorious morning, mild and sunny as an April day, as though nature took a hand in the dowager's triumph and wished to make the best of its wintry garb in honor of it. The presence of this gross suitor of hers afforded her another source of satisfaction. There would no longer be the necessity she once had dreaded of listening to his suit for longer than it should be her pleasure to be amused by him. But when Trayson spoke, he struck the first note of discord in the perfect harmony which the dowager imagined existed. "Madam," said he, "I am desolated that I am not a bearer of better tidings. But for all that we have made the most diligent search, the man Rebecca has not yet been apprehended. Still, we have not abandoned hope," he added, by way of showing that there was a silver lining to his cloud of danger. For just a moment Madame's brows were knitted. She had forgotten Rebecca until now. But an instant's reflection assured her that in forgetting him she had done him no more than such honor as he deserved. She laughed as she led the way down the garden steps. The mildness of the day and the brightness of her mood had moved her there to receive the seneschal. From the somberness of your tone one might fear your news to be of the nature of some catastrophe. What shall it signify that Rebecca eludes your men? He is but a lackey after all. "True," said the seneschal very soberly. "But do not forget, I beg, that he is a bearer of letters from one who is not a lackey." The laughter went out of her face at that. Here was something that had been lost sight of in the all-absorbing joy of other things. In calling the forgotten Rebecca to mind, she had but imagined that it was no more than a matter of the tale he might tell. A tale not difficult to refute, she thought. Her word should always weigh against the lackey's. But that letter was a vastly different matter. "He must be found, Trayson," she said sharply. Trayson smiled uneasily and chewed at his beard. "No effort shall be spared," he promised her. "Of that you may be very sure. The affairs of the province are at a standstill," he added, that vanity of his for appearing a man of infinite business, rising even in an hour of such anxiety. For to himself, no less than to her, was there danger should Rebecca ever reach his destination with the papers Garnash had said he carried. "The affairs of the province are at a standstill," he repeated, "while all my energies are bent upon this quest. Should we fail to have news of his capture in Dauphiny, we need not, nevertheless, despond. I have sent men after him along the 3 roads that lead to Paris. They are to spare neither money nor horses in picking up his trail and effecting his capture. After all, I think we shall have him. He is our only danger now," the Marquise answered. "For Florimond is dead of a fever," she added, with a sneering smile which gave Trayson sensations as of cold water on his spine. It were an irony of fate if that miserable lackey were to reach Paris now and spoil the triumph for which we have worked so hard. "It were indeed," Trayson agreed with her, "and we must see that he does not." "But if he does," she returned, "then we must stand together." And with that she set her mind at ease once more, her mood that morning being very optimistic. "Always, I hope, Clotilde," he answered, and his little eyes leered up out of the dimples of fat in which they were embedded. "I have stood by you like a true friend in this affair. Is it not so?" "Indeed, do I deny it," she answered half scornfully. "As I shall stand by you always when the need arises. You are a little in my debt concerning Monsieur de Garnache." I realize it," said she, and she felt again as if the sunshine were gone from the day, the blitheness from her heart. She was moved to bid him cease leering at her, and to take himself and his wooing to the devil. But she bethought her that the need for him might not yet utterly be past, not only in the affair of Garnache, in which he stood implicated as deeply as herself, might she require his loyalty, but also in the matter of what had befallen yesterday at La Rochette. For despite Fortunio's assurances that things had gone smoothly, his tale hung none too convincingly together, and while she did not entertain any serious fear of subsequent trouble, yet it might be well not utterly to banish the consideration of such a possibility, and to keep the seneschal her ally against it. So she told him now, with as much graciousness as she could command, that she fully realized her debt, and when encouraged he spoke of his reward, she smiled upon him as might a girl smile upon too impetuous a wooer whose impetuosity she deprecates yet cannot wholly withstand. "I am a widow of 6 months," she reminded him, as she had reminded him once before. Her widowhood was proving a most convenient refuge. "It is not for me to listen to a suitor, however my foolish heart may incline. Come to me in another 6 months' time." "And you will wed me then," he bleated. By an effort her eyes smiled down upon him, although her face was a trifle drawn. "Have I not said that I will listen to no suitor? And what is that but a suitor's question? He caught her hand. He would have fallen on his knees there and then at her feet, on the grass still wet with the night's mist, but that he in time bethought him of how sadly his fine apparel would be the sufferer. Yet I shall not sleep. I shall know no rest, no peace until you give me an answer. Just an answer is all I ask. I will set a curb upon my impatience afterwards and go through my period of probation without murmuring. Say that you will marry me in 6 months' time. At Easter, say. She saw that an answer she must give, and so she gave him the answer that he craved. And he, poor fool, never caught the ring of her voice, as false as the ring of a base coin, never guessed that in promising she told herself it would be safe to break that promise 6 months hence, when the need of him and his loyalty would be past. A man approached them briskly from the chateau. He brought news that a numerous company of monks was descending the valley of the Iser towards Condillac. A faint excitement stirred her, and accompanied by Trace, and she retraced her steps and made for the battlements, when she might overlook their arrival. As they went, Trace and asked for an explanation of this cortege, and she answered him with Fortunio's story of how things had sped yesterday at La Rochette. Up the steps leading to the battlements, she went ahead of him, with a youthful, eager haste that took no thought for the corpulence and short-windedness of the following seneschal. From the heights she looked eastwards, shading her eyes from the light of the morning sun, and surveyed the procession which with slow dignity paced down the valley towards Condillac. At its head walked the tall, lean figure of the abbot of St. Francis of Cales, bearing on high a silver crucifix that flashed and scintillated in the sunlight. His cowl was thrown back, revealing his pale, ascetic countenance and shaven head. Behind him came a coffin covered by a black pall and borne on the shoulders of 6 black-robed, black-cowled monks, and behind these again walked, 2 by 2, some 14 cowled brothers of the order of St. Francis, their heads bowed, their arms folded, and their hands tucked away in their capacious sleeves. It was a numerous cortege, and as she watched its approach, the marquise was moved to wonder by what arguments had the proud abbot been induced to do so much honor to a dead Condillac and bear his body home to this excommunicated roof. Behind the monks, a closed carriage lumbered down the uneven mountain way, and behind this rode 4 mounted grooms in the livery of Condillac. Of Marius she saw nowhere any sign, and she inferred him to be traveling in that vehicle, the attendant servants being those of the dead marquis. In silence, with the seneschal at her elbow, she watched the procession advance until it was at the foot of the drawbridge. Then, while the solemn rhythm of their feet sounded across the planks that spanned the moat, she turned, and, signing to the seneschal to follow her, she went below to meet them. But when she reached the courtyard, she was surprised to find they had not paused, as surely would have been seemly. Unbidden, the abbot had gone forward to the great doorway and down the gallery that led to the hall of Condillac. Already, when she arrived below, the coffin and its bearers had disappeared, and the last of the monks was passing from sight in its wake. Leaning against the doorway through which they were vanishing stood Fortunio, idly watching that procession and thoughtfully stroking his mustachios. About the yard lounged a dozen or so men-at-arms, practically all the garrison that was left them since the fight with Garnash 2 nights ago. After the last monk had disappeared, she still remained there, expectantly, and when she saw that neither the carriage nor the grooms made their appearance, she stepped up to Fortunio to inquire into the reason of it. "Surely Monsieur de Condillac rides in that coach," said she. "Surely," Fortunio answered, himself looking puzzled. "I will go seek the reason, madam. Meanwhile, will you receive the abbot? The monks will have deposited their burden." She composed her features into a fitting solemnity, and passed briskly through the hall, Tracing ever at her heels. Here she found the coffin deposited on the table, its great black pall of velvet, silver-edged, sweeping down to the floor. No fire had been lighted that morning, nor had the sun yet reached the windows, so that the place wore a chill and gloomy air that was perhaps well attuned to the purpose that it was being made to serve. With a rare dignity, her head held high, she swept down the length of that noble chamber toward the abbot, who stood erect as a pikestaff at the table head, awaiting her. And well was it for him that he was a man of austere habit of mind, else might her majestic, incomparable beauty have softened his heart and melted the harshness of his purpose. He raised his hand when she was within a sword's length of him, and with startling words, delivered in ringing tones, he broke the ponderous silence. "Wretched woman," he denounced her, Your sins have found you out. Justice is to be done, and your neck shall be bent to spite your stubborn pride. Derider of priests, despoiler of purity, mocker of holy church, your impious reign is at an end. Tresen fell back aghast, his face blenching to the lips. For if justice was at hand for her, as the abbot said, then was justice at hand for him as well. Where had their plans miscarried? What flaw was there that hitherto she had not perceived? Thus he questioned himself in his sudden panic. But the Marquise was no sharer in his tremors. Her eyes opened a trifle wider. A faint color crept into her cheeks, but her only emotions were of amazement and indignation. Was he mad, this shaveling monk? That was the question that leapt into her mind, the very question with which she coldly answered his outburst. For madness only, she thought fit to add, could excuse such rash temerity as yours. Not madness, madam, he answered with chill haughtiness. Not madness, but righteous indignation. You have defied the power of Holy Church as you have defied the power of our sovereign lady, and justice is upon you. We are here to present the reckoning and see its payment made in full. She fancied he alluded to the body in the coffin, the body of her stepson, and she could have laughed at his foolish conclusions that she must account Florimond's death an act of justice upon her for her impiety. But her rising anger left her no room for laughter. I thought, Sir Priest, you were come to bury the dead, but it rather seems you were come to talk. He looked at her long and sternly. Then he shook his head, and the faintest shadow of a smile haunted his ascetic face. Not to talk, madam. Oh, not to talk, he answered slowly, but to act. I have come, madam, to liberate from this shambles the gentle lamb you hold here prisoned. At that some of the color left her cheeks. Her eyes grew startled. At last she began to realize that all was not as she had thought, as she had been given to understand. Still, she sought to hector it, from very instinct. Vertud you, she thundered at him. What mean you? Behind her Tresen's great plump knees were knocking one against the other. Fool that he had been to come to Condillac that day, and to be trapped thus in her company, a partner in her guilt. This proud abbot who stood there uttering denunciations had some power behind him. Else had he never dared to raise his voice in Condillac within call of desperate men who would give little thought to the sacredness of his office. What mean you? She repeated, adding with a sinister smile. In your zeal, Sir Abbot, you are forgetting that my men are within call. So, madam, are mine, was his astounding answer, and he waved a hand toward the array of monks, all standing with bowed heads and folded arms. At that her laughter rang shrill through the chamber. These poor shavelings, she questioned. Just these poor shavelings, madam, he answered, and he raised his hand again and made a sign. And then an odd thing happened, and it struck a real terror into the heart of the Marquise and heightened that which was already afflicting her fat lover, Tresen. The monks drew themselves erect. It was as if a sudden gust of wind had swept through their ranks and set them all in motion. Cowls fell back and habits were swept aside, and where 20 monks had stood, there were standing now a score of nimble, stalwart men in the livery of Condillac, all fully armed, all grinning in enjoyment of her and Tresen's dismay. One of them turned aside and locked the door of the chamber, but his movement went unheeded by the dowager, whose beautiful eyes, starting with horror, were now back upon the grim figure of the abbot, marveling almost to see no transformation wrought in him. Treachery, she breathed, in an awful voice that was no louder than a whisper, and again her eyes traveled round the company, and suddenly they fastened upon Fortunio, standing 6 paces from her to the right, pulling thoughtfully at his mustachios, and manifesting no surprise at what had taken place. In a sudden blind choler, she swept round, plucked the dagger from Tresen's belt, and flung herself upon the treacherous captain. He had betrayed her in some way. He had delivered up Condillac, into whose power she had yet had no time to think. She caught him by the throat with a hand of such nervous strength as one would little have suspected from its white and delicate contour. Her dagger was poised in the air, and the captain, taken thus suddenly, was palsied with amazement and could raise no hand to defend himself from the blow impending. But the abbot stepped suddenly to her side and caught her wrist in his thin, transparent hand. Forbear, he bade her. The man is but a tool. She fell back, dragged back almost by the abbot, panting with rage and grief, And then she noticed that during the moment that her back had been turned, the pall had been swept from a coffin. The sight of the bear deal box arrested her attention, and for the moment turned aside her anger. What fresh surprise did they prepare her? No sooner had she asked herself the question than herself she answered it. An icy hand seemed to close about her heart. It was Marius who was dead. They had lied to her. Marius's was the body they had borne to Condillac, those men in the livery of her stepson. With a sudden sob in her throat, she took a step towards the coffin. She must see for herself. One way or the other, she must at once dispel this torturing doubt. But ere she had taken 3 paces, she stood arrested again, her hands jerked suddenly to the height of her breast, her lips parting to let out a scream of terror. For the coffin lid had slowly raised and clattered over, and as if to pile terror for her, a figure rose from a box and, sitting up, looked round with a grim smile. And the figure was the figure of a man whom she knew to be dead, a man who had died by her contriving. It was the figure of Garnash. It was Garnash as he had been on the occasion of his first coming to Condillac, as he had been on the day they had sought his life in this very room. How well she knew that great hooked nose and the bright, steely blue eyes, the dark brown hair, ash-color at the temples where age had paled it, and the fierce, reddish mustachios bristling above the firm mouth and long, square chin. She stared and stared, her beautiful face livid and distorted, till there was no beauty to be seen in it. What time the abbot regarded her coldly and traced him behind her, turned almost sick with terror. But not the terror of ghosts was it afflicted him. He saw in Garnash a man who was still the quick, a man who by some miracle had escaped the fate to which they supposed him to succumb, and his terror was the terror of the reckoning which that man would ask. After a moment's pause, as if relishing the sensation he had created, Garnash rose to his feet and leapt briskly to the ground. There was nothing ghostly about the thud with which he alighted on his feet before her. A part of her terror left her, yet not quite all. She saw that she had but a man to deal with. Yet she began to realize that this man was very terrible. "Garnash again," she gasped. He bowed serenely, his lips smiling. "Aye, madam," he told her pleasantly. "Always Garnash. Tenacious as a leech, madam, and like a leech come hither to do a little work of purification." Her eyes, now kindling again as she recovered from her recent fears, sought Fortunio's shifty glance. Garnash followed it and read what was in her mind. "What Fortunio has done," said he has done by your son's authority and sanction." "Marius?" she inquired, and she was almost fearful lest she should hear that by her son he meant her stepson, and that Marius was dead. "Yes, Marius," he answered her. "I bent him to my will. I threatened him that he and this fellow of his, this comrade in arms so worthy of his master, should be broken on the wheel together unless I were implicitly obeyed. If they would save their lives, this was their chance. They were wise, and they took it, and thus afforded me the means of penetrating into Condillac and rescuing Mademoiselle de la Vauvray." Then Marius... She left her question unfinished, her hand clutching nervously at the bosom of her gown. "Is sound and well, as Fortunio truthfully will have told you. But he is not yet out of my grasp, nor will be until the affairs of Condillac are settled. For if I meet with further opposition here, broken on the wheel, he shall be yet, I promise you." Still she made a last attempt at hectoring it. The long habit of mastership dies hard. She threw back her head. Her courage revived now that she knew Marius to be alive and sound. "Fine words," she sneered. "But who are you that you can threaten so and promise so?" "I am the Queen Regent's humble mouthpiece, madam. What I threaten in her name. Ruffle it no longer, I beseech you. It will prove little worth your while. You are deposed, madam, and you had best take your deposition with dignity and calm. In all friendliness do I advise it." "I am not yet come so low that I need your advice," she answered sourly. "You may before the sun sets," he answered, with his quiet smile. "The Marquis de Condillac and his wife are still at La Rochette, waiting until my business here is done that they may come home." "His wife!" she cried. "His wife, madam. He has brought home a wife from Italy." Then Marius? She said no more than that. Maybe she had no intention of muttering even so much of her thoughts aloud. But Garnash caught the trend of her mind, and he marveled to see how strong a habit of thought can be. At once upon hearing of the Marquis's marriage, her mind had flown back to its wonted pondering of the possibilities of Marius's wedding Valerie. But Garnash dispelled such speculations. "No, madam," said he, "Marius looks elsewhere for a wife, unless mademoiselle of her own free will elect to wed him, a thing unlikely." Then, with a sudden change of sternness, "Mademoiselle de la Vauvray is well, madam?" he asked. She nodded her head, but made no answer in words. He turned to Fortunio. "Go, fetch her," he bade the captain, and one of the men unlocked the door to let Fortunio out upon that errand. The Parisian took a turn in the apartment and came close to Trésan. He nodded to the seneschal with a friendliness that turned him sick with fright. "Well met, my dear Lord Seneschal. I am rejoiced to find you here. Had it been otherwise, I must have sent for you. There's a little matter to be settled between us. You may depend upon me to settle it to your present satisfaction, if to your future grief." And with a smile he passed on, leaving the seneschal too palsied to answer him, too stricken to disclaim his share in what had taken place at Condillac. "You have terms to make with me?" the Marquis questioned proudly. "Certainly," he answered, with his grim courtesy. "Upon your acceptance of those terms shall depend Marius's life and your own future liberty." "What are they?" "That within the hour all your people, to the last scullion, shall have laid down their arms and vacated Condillac." It was beyond her power to refuse. "The Marquis will not drive me forth," she half affirmed, half asked. "The Marquis, madam, has no power in this matter. It is for the Queen to deal with your insubordination, for me as the Queen's emissary. If I consent, monsieur, what then?" He shrugged his shoulders and smiled quietly. "There is no if. Madam, consent you must, willingly or unwillingly. To make sure of that have I come back thus, and with force. But should you deliver battle, you will be worsted, and it will be very ill for you. Bid your men depart, as I have told you, and you also shall have liberty to go hence." "Ay, but whither?" she cried, in a sudden frenzy of anger. "I realize, madam, from what I know of your circumstances, that you will be well nigh homeless. You should have thought of how one day you might come to be dependent upon the Marquis de Condillac's generosity before you set yourself to conspire against him, before you sought to encompass his death. You can hardly look for generosity at his hands now, and so you will be all but homeless, unless," he paused, and his eyes strayed to Trésan and were laden with a sardonic look. "You take a very daring tone with me," she told him. "You speak to me as no man has ever dared to speak. When the power was yours, madam, you dealt with me as none has ever dared to deal. The advantage now is mine. Behold how I use in your own interests. Observe how generously I shall deal with you who deal in murder. Monsieur de Trésan," he called briskly. The seneschal started forward, as if someone had prodded him suddenly. "Move, monsieur," said he. "With you, too, will I return good for evil. Come hither." The seneschal approached, wondering what was about to take place. The Marquise watched his coming, a cold glitter in her eye. For, keener of mental vision than Trésan, she already knew the hideous purpose that was in Garnash's mind. The soldiers grinned. The abbot looked on with an impassive face. "The Marquise de Condillac is likely to be homeless henceforth," said the Parisian, addressing the seneschal. "Will you not be gallant enough to offer her a home, Monsieur de Trésan?" "Will I?" gasped Trésan, scarce daring to believe his own ears. His eyes stared with a look that was almost one of vacancy. "Madame well knows how readily." "Oh-ho!" crowed Garnash, who had been observing Madame's face. "She knows? Then do so, monsieur, and on that condition I will forget your indiscretions here. I pledge you my word that you shall not be called to further account for the lives that have been lost through your treachery and want of loyalty, provided that of your own free will you lay down your seneschalship of Dauphiny, an office which I cannot consent to see you filling hereafter." Trésan stared from the dowager to Garnash and back to the dowager. She stood there as if Garnash's words had turned her into marble, bereft of speech through very rage. And then the door opened, and Mademoiselle de la Vauvray entered, followed closely by Fortunio. At sight of Garnash, she stood still, set her hand on her heart, and uttered a low cry. Was indeed Garnash she saw, Garnash, her brave knight-errant? He looked no longer as he had looked during those days when he had been her jailer, but he looked as she liked to think of him since she had accounted him dead. He advanced to meet her, a smile in his eyes that had something wistful in it. He held out both hands to her, and she took them, and there, under the eyes of all, before he could snatch them away, she had stooped and kissed them, whilst a murmur of thank God, escaped from her lips to heaven. Mademoiselle, mademoiselle, he remonstrated when it was too late to stay her. You must not. It is not seemly in me to allow it. He saw in the act no more than an expression of gratitude for what he had done to serve her, and for the risk in which his life had been so willingly placed in that service. Under the suasion of his words, she grew calm again. Then, suddenly, a fear stirred her once more in that place where she had known naught but fears. Why are you here, monsieur? You have come into danger again. No, no, he laughed. These are my own men, at least for the time being. I am come in power this time, to administer justice. What shall be done with this lady, mademoiselle? He asked, and knowing well the merciful sweetness of the girl's soul, he added, Speak, now. Her fate shall rest in your hands. Valerie looked at her enemy, and then her eyes strayed round the room and took stock of the men standing there in silence, of the abbot who still remained at the table head, a pale, scarce interested spectator of this odd scene. The change had come so abruptly. A few minutes ago she had been still a prisoner, suffering tortures at having heard that Marius was to return that day, and that willy-nilly she must wed him now. And now she was free, it seemed. Her champion was returned in power, and he stood bidding her decide the fate of her late oppressors. Madame's face was ashen. She judged the girl by her own self. She had no knowledge of any such infinite sweetness as that of this child's nature, a sweetness that could do no hurt to any. Death was what the marquise expected, since she knew that death which she herself had pronounced had the positions been reversed. But, let her go in peace, monsieur, she heard mademoiselle say, and she could not believe but that she was being mocked. And as if mockery were at issue, Garnache laughed. We will let her go, mademoiselle, yet not quite her own way. You must not longer remain unrestrained, madam, he told the marquise. Nature such as yours need a man's guidance. I think you will be sufficiently punished if you wed this rash Monsieur de Trésen, just as he will be sufficiently punished later, when disillusionment follows his present youthful ardor. Make each other happy, then. And he waved his arms from one to the other. Our good father, here, will tie the knot at once, and then, my lord seneschal, you may bear home your bride. Her son shall follow you. But the marquise blazed out now. She stamped her foot, and her eyes seemed to have taken fire. Never, sir, never in life, she cried. I will not be so constrained. I am the Marquise de Condillac, monsieur. Do not forget it. I am hardly in danger of doing that. It is because I remember it that I urge you to change your estate with all dispatch, and cease to be the Marquise de Condillac. That same marquise has a heavy score against her. Let her evade payment by this metamorphosis. I have opened for you, madam, a door through which you may escape. You are insolent, she told him. By God, sir, I am no baggage to be disposed of by the will of any man. At that Garnache himself took fire. Her anger proved as the steel smiting the flint of his own nature, and one of his fierce bursts of blazing passion whirled about her head. And what of this child here? He thundered. What of her, madam? Was she a baggage to be disposed of by the will of any man or woman? Yet you sought to dispose of her against her heart, against her nature, against her plighted word. Enough said, he barked, and so terrific was his mien and voice that the stout-spirited dowager was cowed, and recoiled as he advanced a step in her direction. Get you married. Take you this man to husband, you who with such calmness sought to drive others into unwilling wedlock. Do it, madam, and do it now, or by the heaven above us, you shall come to Paris with me, and you'll not find them nice there. It will avail you little to storm and shout at them that you are Marquise de Condillac. As a murderess and a rebel shall you be tried, and as both or either it is odds you will be broken on the wheel, and your son with you. So make your choice, madam. He ceased. Valerie had caught him by the arm. At once his fury fell from him. He turned to her. What is it, child? Do not compel her, if she will not wed him, said she. I know, and she did not. How terrible a thing it is. Nay, patience, child. He soothed her, smiling now, his smile as the sunshine that succeeds a thunderstorm. It is none so bad with her. She is but coy. They have plighted their troth already, so it seems. Besides, I do not compel her. She shall marry him of her own free will, or else go to Paris and stand her trial and the consequences. They have plighted their troth, do you say? Well, had you not, Monsieur le Seneschal? We had, monsieur, said Tresan with conscious pride, and for myself I am ready for these immediate nuptials. Then, in God's name, let Madame give us her answer now. We have not the day to waste. She stood looking at him, her toe tapping the ground, her eyes sullenly angry, and in the end, half fainting in her great disdain, she consented to do his will. Paris and the wheel formed too horrible an alternative. Besides, even if that were spared her, there was but hovel in Touraine for her, and Tresan, for all his fat ugliness, was wealthy. So the abbot, who had lent himself to the mummery of coming there to read a burial service, made ready now, by order of the Queen's emissary, to solemnize a wedding. It was soon done. Fortunio stood sponsor for Tresan, and Garnache himself insisted upon handing the Lord Seneschal his bride, a stroke of irony which hurt the proud lady of Condillac more than all her sufferings of the past half hour. When it was over, and the Dowager Marquise de Condillac had been converted into the Comtesse de Tresan, Garnache bade them depart in peace and at once. As I have promised, you shall be spared all prosecution, Monsieur de Tresan, he assured the Seneschal at parting. But you must resign at once the King's Seneschalship of Dauphiny, else will you put me to the necessity of having you deprived of your office, and that might entail unpleasant consequences. They went, Madame with bowed head, her stubborn pride broken at last, as the abbot of St. Francis had so confidently promised her. After them went the abbot and the lackeys of Florimond, and Fortunio went with these to carry out Garnache's orders that the men of the Dowager's garrison be sent packing at once, leaving with the Parisian in the great hall, just Mademoiselle de la Vauvray. Chapter 24. St. Martin's Eve. Uneasy in his mind, seeking some way to tell the thing and acquit himself of the painful task before him, Garnache took a turn in the apartment. Mademoiselle leaned against the table, which was still burdened by the empty coffin, and observed him. His ponderings were vain. He could find no way to tell his story. She had said that she did not exactly love this Florimond, that her loyalty to him was no more than her loyalty to her father's wishes. Nevertheless, he thought, what manner of hurt must not her pride receive when she learned that Florimond had brought him home a wife? Garnache was full of pity for her and for the loneliness that must be hers hereafter, mistress of a vast estate in Dauphiny, alone and friendless, and he was a little sorry for himself and the loneliness which he felt would be his hereafter. But that was by the way. At last it was she herself who broke the silence. "Monsieur," she asked him, and her voice was strained and husky, "were you in time to save Florimond?" "Yes, mademoiselle," he answered readily, glad that by that question she should have introduced the subject. "I was in time." "And Marius?" she inquired. "From what I heard you say, I take it that he has suffered no harm." "He has suffered none. I have spared him that he might participate in the joy of his mother at her union with Monsieur de Tresan." "I am glad it was so, monsieur. Tell me of it." Her voice sounded formal and constrained, but either he did not hear or did not heed the question. "Mademoiselle," he said slowly, "Florimond is coming." "Florimond?" she broke in, and her voice went shrill, as if with sudden fear. Her cheeks turned white as chalk. The thing that for months she had hoped and prayed for was come at last, and it struck her almost dead with terror. He remarked the change, and set it down to a natural excitement. He paused a moment. Then, he is still at La Rochette, but he does no more than wait until he shall have learned that his stepmother has departed from Condillac. But why? "Was he then in no haste come to me?" she inquired, her voice faltering. "He is." He stopped and tugged at his mustachios, his eyes regarding her somberly. He was close beside her now, where he had halted, and he set his hand gently upon her shoulder, looked down into that winsome little oval face she raised to his. "Mademoiselle," he inquired, "would afflict you very sorely if you were not destined after all to wed the Lord of Condillac?" "Afflict me?" she echoed. The very question set her gasping with hope. No, monsieur, it would not afflict me." "That is true? That is really, really true?" he cried, and his tone seemed less despondent. Don't you know how true it is? She said, in such accents and with such a shy, upward look that something seemed suddenly to take Garnash by the throat. The blood flew to his cheeks. He fancied an odd meaning in those words of hers, a meaning that set his pulses throbbing faster than joy or peril had ever set them yet. Then he checked himself, and deep down in his soul, he seemed to hear a peal of mocking laughter, just such a burst of sardonic mirth as had broken from his lips 2 nights ago when on his way to Voiron. Then he went back to the business he had in hand. I am glad it is so with you, he said quietly, because Florimond has brought him home a wife. The words were out, and he stood back as stands a man who, having cast an insult, prepares to ward the blow he expects an answer. He had looked for a storm, a wild, frantic outburst, the lightning of flashing angry eyes, the thunder of outraged pride. Instead, here was a gentle calm, a wan smile overspreading her sweet, pale face, and then she hid that face in her hands, buried face and hands upon his shoulder, and fell to weeping very quietly. This, he thought, was almost worse than the tempest he had looked for. How was he to know that these tears were the overflow of a heart that was on the point of bursting from sheer joy? He patted her shoulder, he soothed her. Little child, he whispered in her ear, what does it matter? You did not really love him. He was all unworthy of you. Do not grieve, child. So that is better. She was looking up at him, smiling through the tears that suffused her eyes. I am weeping for joy, monsieur, said she. For joy, quoth he. Vertude you. There is no end to the things a woman weeps for. Unconsciously, instinctively almost, she nestled closer to him, and again his pulses throbbed, again that flush came to overspread his lean countenance. Very softly he whispered in her ear, Will you go to Paris with me, mademoiselle? He meant by that question no more than to ask whether, now that here in Dauphiny she would be friendless and alone, it were not better for her to place herself under the care of the Queen Regent. But what blame to her if she misunderstood the question, if she read in it the very words her heart was longing to hear from him? The very gentleness of his tone implied his meaning to be the one she desired. She raised her hazel eyes again to his. She nestled closer to him, and then, with a shy fluttering of her lids, a delicious red suffusing her virgin cheek, she answered very softly, I will go anywhere with you, monsieur, anywhere. With a cry, he broke from her. There was no fancying now, no possibility of misunderstanding. He saw how she had misread his question, how she had delivered herself up to him in answer. His almost roughness startled her, and she stared at him as he stamped down the apartment and back to where she stood, seeking in vain to master the turbulence of his feelings. He stood still again. He took her by the shoulders and held her at arm's length before him, thus surveying her, and there was trouble in his keen eyes. Mademoiselle, mademoiselle, he cried. Valerie, my child, what are you saying to me? What would you have me say? She asked, her eyes upon the floor. Was I too forward? It seemed to me there could not be question of such a thing between us now. I belong to you. What man has ever served a woman as you have served me? What better friend, what nobler lover did ever woman have? Why then need I take shame at confessing my devotion? He swallowed hard, and there was a mist before his eyes that had looked unmoved on many a scene of carnage. You know not what you do, he cried out, and his voice was as the voice of one in pain. I am old. Old, she echoed in deep surprise, and she looked up at him, as if she sought evidence of what he stated. I old, he assured her bitterly. Look at the gray in my hair, the wrinkles in my face. I am no likely lover for you, child. You'll need a lusty, comely young gallant. She looked at him, and a faint smile flickered at the corners of her lips. She observed his straight, handsome figure, his fine air of dignity and of strength. Every inch a man was he. Never lived there one who was more man, and what more than such a man could any maid desire? You are all that I would have you, she answered him, and in his mind he almost cursed her stubbornness, her want of reason. I am peevish and cross-grained, he informed her, and I have grown old in ignorance of woman's ways. Love has never come to me until now. What manner of lover, think you, can I make? Her eyes were on the windows at his back. The sunshine striking through them seemed to give her the reply she sought. Tomorrow will be St. Martin's Day, she told him. Yet see where the warmth the sun is shining. A poor, make-believe St. Martin summer, said he. I am fitly answered by her allegory. Oh, not make-believe, she exclaimed. There is no make-believe in the sun's brightness and its warmth. We see it and we feel it, and we are none the less glad of it because the time of year should be November. Rather do we take the greater joy in it. And it is not yet November in your life, not yet by many months. What you say is apt, perhaps, said he, and may seem more apt than it is since my name is Martin, though I am no saint. Then he shook off this mood that he accounted selfish, this mood that would take her as the wolf takes a lamb, with no thought but for his own hunger. No, no, he cried out. It were unworthy in me. When I love you, Martin, she asked him gently. A moment he stared at her, as if through those clear eyes he would penetrate to the very depths of her maiden soul. Then he sank on to his knees before her, as any stripling lover might have done, and kissed her hands in token of the fact that he was conquered.